I was 24, fresh out of national service, and desperately searching for affordable housing in one of the world's most expensive cities. After weeks of rejections and astronomical rent prices, I stumbled across a listing that seemed too good to be true. A small studio apartment in the heart of Taipei for less than half the market rate. The building looked weathered from the outside, its concrete facade stained with decades of monsoon rains and urban pollution. But I was in no position to be picky. The landlord, an elderly man with deep lines carved into his weathered face, met me at the entrance. His eyes held a weariness that went beyond simple old age. As we climbed the narrow stairwell to the 4th floor, our footsteps echoed against the peeling walls. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows that made the climb feel longer than it should have been. Room 407 was at the end of a dimly lit corridor. The door was painted a faded red that had turned almost brown with age. Inside, the space was cramped but functional. A small bed, a tiny kitchenette, and a bathroom barely large enough for one person. The windows faced an inner courtyard, offering a view of laundry lines and the backs of other aging buildings. As I signed the lease agreement, the landlord's expression grew serious. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "People don't stay long here," he said, his eyes avoiding mine. "Most tenants leave within a month or two." I laughed nervously, assuming he was referring to the building's poor condition or the noise from the busy street below. I thanked him for his honesty, but assured him I wasn't easily bothered by minor inconveniences. That first night, I unpacked my few belongings with a sense of relief. Finally, I had my own space in the city. The room felt peaceful in the evening light, and I arranged my desk near the window where I could work on my laptop. As darkness settled over Taipei, I began to notice how quiet the building became. Unlike the bustling hostels I'd stayed in before, this place seemed to absorb sound rather than amplify it. I was settling in at my desk around 10 o'clock when I first noticed something unusual. The bathroom door, which I was certain I had left closed, stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow that seemed too dense, too purposeful to be explained by the shifting light from outside. I stared at the opening for several minutes, waiting for the shadow to move again, but everything remained still. When I finally worked up the courage to investigate, the bathroom was empty, just white tiles and a small mirror reflecting my own uncertain expression. The second strange incident happened 3 nights later. I woke to an overwhelming smell of incense filling the room. The scent was so thick it made my eyes water, as if someone had been burning ceremonial sticks for hours. But I had no incense in the apartment, and the building's old ventilation system made it impossible for such a strong smell to drift in from neighboring units. When morning came, I discovered something that made my skin crawl. Scattered across my pillow were small piles of ash, gray and fine, as if someone had burned paper offerings directly above my sleeping head. The mysterious shoes appeared the following week. I stepped out of my room one morning to find a pair of women's shoes placed neatly beside my own outside the door. They were simple black flats, slightly muddy, as if their owner had walked through puddles. I asked every neighbor on my floor about them, but each person denied ownership with expressions that seemed genuinely confused. The shoes disappeared by evening, only to be replaced the next morning by a different pair. Brown leather sandals this time, also muddy, also unclaimed. This pattern continued for days. Each morning brought a new pair of women's shoes, always placed precisely next to mine, always slightly dirty, and always belonging to no one I could find. The sight of them began to fill me with an inexplicable dread that made my hands shake as I locked my door each day. The sounds from above started during my second week in room 407. Every evening around 9 o'clock, I would hear the distinctive clacking of mahjong tiles being shuffled and placed. The sound was accompanied by muffled laughter and the scraping of chairs across the floor. At first, I was relieved to know I had active neighbors who might provide some sense of community in this otherwise silent building. But when I climbed the stairs to introduce myself, I found the 5th floor completely dark. The apartment directly above mine was clearly abandoned, its door sealed with official notices and a thick layer of dust coating the entrance. The windows were boarded up from the inside, and the electrical meter showed no power consumption. Yet, every night, the sounds continued with perfect regularity, as if invisible players gathered for their eternal game just above my head. The isolation of that building began to wear on me in ways I hadn't anticipated. During the day, when sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, room 407 felt almost normal. But as evening approached, the atmosphere would shift dramatically. The walls seemed to close in, and every small sound became amplified in the oppressive silence. I established a routine to cope with the mounting strangeness, work at my desk until late, eat simple meals in the tiny kitchenette, and try to ignore the increasingly frequent disturbances. But the presence I felt in that room was becoming impossible to dismiss. It was during one of those quiet dinners, as I sat picking at a bowl of instant noodles, that I saw her for the first time. I was lifting the chopsticks to my mouth when movement in my peripheral vision made me freeze. Behind the doorframe leading to the main room, a figure was watching me, just the edge of a face, pale and motionless, peering around the corner like a curious child playing hide and seek. My heart hammered against my empty space, and the familiar shadows cast ribs as I slowly turned my head to get a better look. Nothing there. The sighting left me shaken for days. I found myself constantly glancing over my shoulder, checking corners and doorways for signs of that pale face. Sleep became elusive, and when I did manage to drift off, my dreams were filled with whispered conversations in a language I couldn't understand and the persistent smell of burning paper money. I was preparing for bed when scratching sounds at my door made me pause. Through the peephole, I could see a stray black cat clawing at the wood, its yellow eyes reflecting the dim hallway light. I opened the door and shooed it away with my foot, watching as it slunk down the corridor and disappeared into the stairwell. Hours later, I woke to the sensation of being watched. In the darkness of my room, perched on the foot of my bed like it owned the place, sat the same black cat. Its golden eyes locked onto mine with an intelligence that felt disturbingly human. Every window was sealed shut, my door remained locked from the inside. Yet somehow this creature had found its way into my sanctuary. When I reached for the light switch, the cat vanished as if it had never been there at all. The supernatural encounters escalated rapidly after that. Desk drawers would slide shut on their own while I worked, the soft click of the mechanism echoing in the stillness. My reflection in the window would sometimes show additional figures standing behind me, transparent shapes that disappeared the moment I turned around. Shadows moved across the walls independently of any light source, flowing like water in patterns that defied logic. But nothing could have prepared me for what I witnessed at the community gathering that month. The local neighborhood association had organized an outdoor event in the small park near my building. Residents sat on plastic chairs, arranged in neat rows, listening to a cultural performance on the makeshift stage. The atmosphere was warm and convivial, a welcome change from the isolation of room 407. I settled into an empty chair near the back, grateful for human company after weeks of supernatural encounters. The performance was traditional Taiwanese opera, the singers' voices carrying clearly through the humid night air. As my eyes scanned the audience, enjoying this rare moment of normalcy, they stopped abruptly on a figure that made my blood run cold. Sitting 3 rows ahead of me was a woman whose presence radiated wrongness. While everyone else faced the stage attentively, she sat perfectly still, her head tilted at an impossible angle. Her neck was bent so severely to one side that her ear nearly touched her shoulder, yet her face was turned toward me with a smile that stretched far too wide across pale features. Her eyes never blinked, never moved, just stared directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I blinked hard and looked again. The chair was empty. That image haunted me for the rest of the evening. Even surrounded by my neighbors, I felt exposed and vulnerable, as if unseen eyes were tracking my every movement. When I finally returned to room 407, I triple-checked the locks and pushed my desk chair against the door for extra security. That night, as I lay in my cramped bed staring at the water-stained ceiling, I felt her presence stronger than ever before. The woman with the twisted neck stood at the foot of my bed, her impossible height forcing her head to bend sideways against the low ceiling. Her pale face hung at that unnatural angle, watching me with eyes that held decades of unfinished business. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't even close my eyes as she moved closer with jerky, unnatural steps. Her smile stretched wider with each movement, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp in the dim light filtering through my grimy window. The temperature in the room plummeted, and I could see my breath forming small clouds in the suddenly frigid air. Just as her cold fingers reached toward my face, I jolted awake, gasping and drenched in sweat. The room was empty, but the lingering smell of decay told me she had been real. That was the moment I knew I couldn't handle this alone anymore. The next morning, I called my grandmother for the first time since moving to Taipei. Through tears, I told her everything that had happened in room 407. She listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of understanding that told me she believed every word. "You need a Taoist priest," she said simply. "Some spirits are too angry to find peace on their own." Master Chen arrived that evening carrying a worn leather bag filled with ritual tools. He was a small, weathered man who moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced the supernatural countless times before. Without saying a word, he began examining my apartment, running his hands along the walls and muttering under his breath. "The energy here is very disturbed," he finally said, unpacking yellow paper talismans covered in red ink. "Someone died in great pain, and they cannot let go." I watched as he performed the cleansing ritual, burning incense and chanting in ancient Chinese while placing protective symbols around my room. The smoke filled the space with a heavy, sweet scent that seemed to push back the oppressive atmosphere that had haunted me for weeks. During the ceremony, she appeared one final time. The woman with the twisted neck materialized in the far corner, but now she seemed less solid, more like a memory than a physical presence. Her wide smile had faded to an expression of profound sadness, and for the first time, I felt pity rather than terror. Master Chen continued his chanting without acknowledging her, but I could tell he sensed her presence too. As the ritual reached its climax, the figure began to fade, becoming transparent until she was nothing more than a shadow on the wall. With one last look in my direction, she dissolved completely, leaving behind only the lingering scent of old incense and something that might have been gratitude. "She is gone for now," Master Chen said as he packed away his tools. "But spirits tied to death by trauma never truly leave. They may return if the conditions are right." His words sent a chill through me, but I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The apartment felt different, lighter somehow, though still tinged with sadness. I stayed in room 407 for 3 more months, long enough to save money for a proper apartment in a newer building. The day I moved out, the elderly landlord helped me carry my boxes to the taxi. As we shook hands goodbye, he looked me in the eye for the first time since I'd signed the lease. "You stayed longer than most," he said, with something that might have been respect. "The woman who died here, she was alone for a very long time. Maybe she just needed someone to see her." I never learned the full story of what happened in room 407, but I didn't need to. Some tragedies are too personal, too painful to be reduced to simple explanations. What mattered was that I had survived my encounter with the supernatural and gained a deep respect for the thin boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond.